Judges. My name is Kendra Jones. I'm Vice President and General Counsel for IBESCC in America. I'm also an LMU alumni, both the MBA program and the law program. I would just turn it over to Michael, I guess, next to give a brief introduction.
Hi, my name is Michael Galvan. My first year judging this course. I own a company called Premier Living Services. We help adults with various disabilities find employment within the California UC system. And I'm looking forward to participating and seeing the presentation and giving feedback. Thank you.
Barbara?
Hi, I'm Barbara Levine. This is my first time judging as well. I work for a 41-year-old nonprofit private-public partnership called the LA County Economic Development Corporation. Thank you.
And we do have another judge who looks like hasn't joined us yet. So if she's able to join later, we'll have her introduce herself a little bit later in the program. Okay, so I'm going to start out with some opening remarks. In this part of the competition, you are taking on a fictional business identity and assigning a fictional business identity to the judges. Please make sure everybody knows who you are and who they are before you begin. You'll have 25 minutes to describe the legal, financial, and ethical dimensions of the problem and to recommend a solution that passes muster on all three accounts. During this time, teams will be uninterrupted. When you are finished, the judges will ask you questions for 10 to 15 minutes. During the Q&A, both you and the judges stay in character. After the Q&A, the judges will give you feedback outside the role playing. So I'll do my best to try to keep us on time. But I guess I'm ready to turn it over unless there's any other questions about the format or the process. Okay, let's get started.
Okay, good afternoon. My name is Anna, and I'm joined by my fellow consultants, Alana, Assad, and Nick from Polar Collective. We're excited to join you, the Governing Council of the Bank of Canada, to discuss the future of digital currencies in Canada. Cryptocurrency is disrupting the banking industry and shifting power dynamics. Cryptocurrency and stablecoins offer the promise of an anonymous, privacy-protected, global currency, free from the oversight of a central power. For the consumer who believes our institutions, such as our banks and government, have too much power, cryptocurrency is an attractive alternative. Only a few years ago, cryptocurrencies were embraced by only a small number of enthusiasts, but we're now seeing mainstream adoption, with 20% of Canadians now owning crypto and 25% considering a future purchase. We've also seen the exponential growth of stablecoin adoption over the past year alone. If this wasn't enough, big tech is showing interest. While Meta's DM project may have been shelved for now, it's not difficult to imagine the immediate impact a Facebook or Amazon coin would have. In addition, the payment landscape is changing. Canadians have always enthusiastically embraced payment modernization, but the pandemic has only accelerated our adoption of contactless payment methods. We are increasingly using mobile e-wallets and sending online transfers. Cash, on the other hand, is considered inconvenient and perceived as unhygienic, and we are seeing a rapid decrease in its use. As the institution responsible for issuing currency, these trends should be noted. The Bank of Canada's mandate is to promote the economic and financial welfare of Canada. The trends we've outlined, the mainstream adoption of private digital currencies and the declining acceptance of cash, pose a threat to your ability to manage economic policy, one of your 4 core functions, and could result in unchecked rates of inflation. Inflation rates have been increasing and currently sit at 5.7%, significantly higher than your target of 2%. While this poses a challenge to most Canadians as prices rise, it's the most vulnerable populations within Canada who would be most affected. For those individuals and families with the lowest levels of income, basic necessities become priced out of reach, risking increased financial inequality within Canada. We propose that by taking action, the Bank of Canada can proactively mitigate risk, fulfill your mandate, and further meet Sustainable Development Goal 8 in promoting sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth through fostering innovation and expanding access to banking and financial services for all Canadians, particularly the 15% of Canadians currently underserved by the banking industry. In response to these threats, we know that you're conducting research into central bank digital currencies. CBDCs offer a unique value proposition over other forms of digital payments, like cash. They're a direct claim on the central bank and offer instant payment settlement. A high level of transaction data can be communicated with each payment and stored on the ledger. They're also programmable to enable conditional automated payments. Each of these traits carries ethical, legal, and financial implications that must be carefully considered. Central banks around the world are actively looking at CBDC. The models we've highlighted here show that design varies widely to reflect each country's priorities and values. The Bahamas, for instance, has designed their CBDC with both ID verified and anonymous options for greater accessibility and financial inclusion. China's digital yuan, on the other hand, is ID verified and fully programmable, which offers a level of data richness and control that may pose a challenge for countries such as Canada with higher privacy needs. These models highlight some of the ethical considerations at play, and the key takeaway here for the Bank of Canada is that Canada's priorities and values must be reflected in the design. Like central banks around the world, you are actively researching CBDC. You've conducted a pilot project looking into CBDC as a tool for international bank settlements, and you've recently announced a research partnership with MIT. You've asked us to determine your next steps. We'll walk you through the ethical, legal, and business implications of this changing landscape, and we'll present to you our vision for central bank digital currency in Canada.
All right, I'd like to take you through the ethical challenges arising with the problem we've outlined today. So when it comes to the ethical dilemma faced by the Bank of Canada, we recognize it's twofold and multidimensional in nature. Doing nothing as an option and proceeding to operate in our current banking structure would have many risks to losing control over monetary policy. On the other hand, doing something and implementing a CBDC has its own set of ethical challenges if it's designed or implemented incorrectly. So first, it's important to discuss how many Canadians are impacted by the current banking system. We know that financial segregation exists between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Canadians. While much of this is due to systemic barriers, it's also largely due to geographic barriers and the availability of services offered. In many rural Indigenous communities, physical access to cash through ATMs or banks is nearly unfeasible, some having over 100-kilometer travel distance to the nearest ATM. With these challenges, it makes it incredibly difficult for many Indigenous Canadians to establish a good credit score or create a financial retirement plan. Oftentimes, they have to rely on payday loan institutions who do offer loans, but at a significantly higher interest rate. As mentioned, it's estimated that about 15% of Canadians are underbanked. That is, these barriers exist for a significant population of Canadians. So what does this mean for the Bank of Canada? Well, the threat of doing nothing when it comes to CBDC is immense. We know there is inequality present in our current system, but losing monetary policy and the ability to control interest rates only puts our most vulnerable population in greater risk. The Bank of Canada has a real opportunity to ensure that these Canadians are not pushed further out of the banking system, and that is through CBDC. So that brings us to our alternative option, which is do something. So doing something about this dilemma means implementing a CBDC that has been carefully designed and considered. It has many features that can benefit the banking system, but if designed incorrectly, the ethical challenges could be significant and could cause more harm than good, hence this twofold ethical dilemma. To understand the ethical challenges that can arise from different design options, we must first understand the key characteristics that make a CBDC what it is. Universal access, data richness, programmability. For universal access, one of the key purposes of CBDC is to create a digital alternative as inclusive as cash. But how can we make sure all Canadians actually do have access? CBDC is also quite data rich, as it can be traced and monitored. This is a great benefit to the banking system and beyond. However, who would have access to this data, and how protected would Canadians be from security breaches? And lastly, it's programmability. That is, the Bank of Canada could have the ability to stimulate or slow down the economy directly to Canadian accounts. But who would determine the conditions surrounding programmability, and how would the privacy and autonomy of Canadians be protected? These are questions that should be explored further. So as I mentioned, there are several different barriers that impede certain individuals from accessing the banking system. Geographic, technological, socioeconomic, behavioral, a general lack of trust or confidence in the banking system. All of these factors taken, if a CBDC were implemented, it would have to benefit the entire population and minimize the risks of pushing some groups further away from the banking system or creating a bigger divide. Canadian banks have been continuously recognized as some of the safest and soundest across the globe. In fact, 85% of Canadian online bankers feel confident about online and digital banking technologies. Because CBDC offers greater insight to financial information, it can offer huge improvements in transparency and reduce criminal activity. However, there are security concerns regarding data breach, government surveillance, and a lack of regulation if implemented incorrectly. Massive threats to security are posed if laws, regulations, and infrastructure are not updated to reflect the unique capabilities of CBDC. A trade-off also exists between protecting the privacy of the users, while also allowing the capacity to utilize the key features such as programmability of CBDC. While it can improve efficiencies and allow for instant access to stimulate or slow down the economy, there are concerns of who would have access to programming and what kind of safeguards will be in place for Canadians to ensure they have autonomy over their own purchases and that there isn't any government overreach or social control. So that brings us to our 4 ethical decision criteria when it comes to designing and implementing CBDC. The Bank of Canada cannot lose control over the financial system. Despite barriers, all Canadians have to be provided fair access. It has to be safe, sound, and secure from data breach and government overreach, and spending and purchase decisions have to remain in the hands of Canadians. The first pillar of our recommendation is as follows. Do something. Implement an accessible CBDC with privacy safeguards and regulatory oversight.
Now let's look at how the legal and regulatory aspects impact the current situation. A recent survey conducted in 3 Eurozone economies indicate that central banks garner the greatest confidence from respondents for digital currency issuance. Canada's banking system has been ranked the soundest in the world 8 consecutive times by the World Economic Forum, and it has the trust of Canadians. The threat posed by cryptocurrencies is not a result of any laws being broken. Existing legal and regulatory framework in the payment sector value security and resiliency, and regulators are slow to adopt new ideas from outside players. But payment technology is evolving rapidly, offering new means of digital payments that are quickly implemented. Cryptocurrencies are capitalizing on this and are gaining adoption by working outside existing regulations. Overall, there is a gap between the pace of technology evolution and regulatory changes. This lack of modernization could impact the Bank of Canada's ability to fulfill its mandate. The Bank of Canada is highly regulated and must operate within the bounds of these regulations. The Bank Act allows only commercial banks and credit unions to hold an account with the Bank of Canada. The Currency Act provides the mandate to design, issue, and distribute physical bills and coins. Finally, Bank of Canada must comply with Privacy Act when collecting and using personal information. Currently, there is no legal precedent limiting the Bank of Canada what the Bank of Canada may do in response to the threat posed by private digital currencies. Due to the technology being in its nascent stage, emerging global trends may inform Canadian legislation. Let's look at 2 recent bills introduced in the US Congress to understand the global perspective. The eCash Act proposes a US dollar that users could hold on their phones or smart cards. However, other senators have introduced a bill to prohibit a digital dollar for individuals. There is no consensus yet, and a debate is expected on CBDCs in a Canadian context. No major court cases currently block the introduction of a CBDC in Canada. However, we are seeing a growing distrust of institutions and a growing perception of rights violation. In the aftermath of the Canadian trucker protests, the government of Canada was sued for invoking the Emergency Act, under which Canadian banks froze $6.1 million US, including in crypto wallets. So concerns of government overreach from segments of the population might lead to lawsuits around the CBDC. However, it is important to note that the Bank of Canada cannot issue a digital currency without legislative authorization. Any potential court case hence would target the government and not the Bank of Canada. Based on the analysis of the legal dimension, we recommend that the Bank of Canada work closely with the government to develop a robust legal and regulatory framework to roll out CBDC.
We're now going to examine the financial and business elements of the current problem. To start, we wanted to remind you of your mandate to improve the economic and financial welfare of Canada. This is done through your 4 key functions: monetary policy to control inflation, ensuring the safety of the financial system, distributing currency, and supervising the retail payment system. How you conduct business is preventing you from fulfilling your mandate. Your structure is hindering you from reaching customers because the banks are affecting the services provided. For example, commercial banks cater to the affluent. They provide them with better interest rates, more products, and lower fees. For those not working with the banks, check cashing and payday lending has grown to be a $1.5 billion industry. This demonstrates the significant need for broader service. You're reliant on those same financial institutions to provide direct customer service. Bank account administration is a huge undertaking that the Bank of Canada does not have nor want to handle. This role has been very profitable for the commercial banks. The Big Five have seen 39% revenue growth since 2015. For anything that the Bank of Canada wants to do in the future, the commercial banks will need involvement, as they will oppose it if they feel that their bottom lines will be threatened. This means continued collaboration is the best path forward for the Bank of Canada. Your corporate culture is amazing for certain things: stability, trustworthiness. These are critical in the banking industry. However, it's also limiting. Your slow pace of innovation and your agility need to be improved to keep up with the technology evolution we're seeing. Your business culture, if not shifted, will leave you behind. Stability is also a theme of the products that you currently have. $61 million were spent in 2019 on producing banknotes, and yet cash use is declining. These plastic banknotes also pose an environmental concern. The cross-border payments process is slow and risky. Because of the pace of settlement, there's significant currency exchange and credit risks, and additional liquidity requirements, and even time zone issues that arise. In 2016, the Bank of Bangladesh lost nearly $1 billion because of their systems, and you're also exposed to those same risks. When looking at the current products, there are cost savings, risk reduction, and time efficiency opportunities everywhere. As well, your current communication model comes with risk too. Currently, the main channel is through media outlets and other institutions. Given the current political climate, clear, direct, and transparent communication is needed for building public trust. The control of inflation is helped significantly by setting expectations, and that narrative could be misrepresented with the current existing communication model. The Bank of Canada lacks control and leaves important communication to others. Currently, other financial institutions are responsible for protecting individual accounts. The Bank of Montreal and CIBC were handed a $23 million penalty after a breach in 2018 that leaked personal data on the internet. The Bank of Canada can avoid legal challenge by maintaining their level of access to personal information. The anonymized data that you currently receive is enough to realize your objective. Based on this analysis of the business functions, we recommend that the Bank of Canada play to its strengths and leverage partners in the industry to deliver an innovative digital currency.
So to recap, the recommendation we've outlined today is that the Bank of Canada moves forward with a CBDC that is accessible and carefully designed. In addition, ensuring there is adequate legal frameworks and regulation in place prior to its implementation. And lastly, using a collaborative approach to ensure all stakeholders' needs are met. We have identified the 3 pillars of this recommendation that have actionable steps. Ethically designing CBDC requires ensuring privacy, guaranteeing accessibility, and an outreach campaign to reach Canadians. Enhancing legislation requires updating regulations and having an oversight committee. And collaboration involves the distribution of CBDC, constructing the network, and working together for innovation in the financial sector. Ensuring ethically designing CBDC and putting privacy protections and financial inclusion at the forefront ensures all Canadians have a fair opportunity. The first design feature is to provide both ID verified and anonymous accounts. ID verified accounts would have the full benefits of full access digital wallets. These can be used for immediate disaster relief, allowing government to send funds directly to individuals in need, and can be used by employers to pay employees immediately, even on a per shift basis. This would eliminate the need to cash a check. Anonymous accounts would use limited digital wallets that would be fully anonymous, but would be restricted to a $10,000 transaction limit, just like cash. Like cash, anonymous accounts allow users concerned about privacy to conduct transactions anonymously. In addition to mobile wallets, to ensure improved financial inclusion for Canadians, we would introduce reloadable offline cards, which can store value much like gift cards. We would distribute these through convenience stores, and we would make cards available with no ID requirement, fully anonymous option, and these can be purchased by everyone, including those who lack government ID or have barriers to accessing banking. And lastly, increasing consumer awareness through financial institutions, media promotion, and advertisements. Messages about low-cost transactions, privacy, and payment efficiency will be crucial for adoption.
The unique nature of CBDC payments dictate a need to establish strong governance and create guide rails for operation. To build a foundation for CBDC to succeed in Canada, existing legislation must be updated. Additionally, an oversight committee comprised of the CBDC system participants should be established. For the Bank of Canada to legally issue a CBDC, 3 existing national legislations must be amended. The Bank Act must be amended to broaden membership to include fintechs. Currency Act must be amended to provide Bank of Canada with the legislative authority to issue CBDC. Due to the data-rich nature of CBDC payments, Privacy Act must be amended to incorporate a robust privacy management program. The creation of a CBDC oversight committee will ensure all stakeholder interests are considered while prioritizing innovation and accountability. This oversight committee will own the CBDC network in Canada and will be governed by its members. The primary members will be the Bank of Canada, the Department of Finance, financial institutions, fintechs, and other payment service providers. The key responsibilities of members will be to define regulations for the CBDC network and provide transparency through monitoring and reporting.
Introducing a CBDC also comes with technical challenges, and the Bank of Canada will leverage its partnerships to provide distribution, build and operate the payment network, and to provide additional customer-serving innovations. This will ensure a financial industry that can evolve to serve future needs. A CBDC will be a claim on the Bank of Canada, but accounts will be provided by existing partners. Financial institutions have existing relationships with customers, and they will continue to work with them. This keeps the banks happy, but moves the Bank of Canada closer to the end customer. The network built will erase personal information, then provide the Bank of Canada with the needed transaction data without additional security risks. To build this new payment network and transaction ledger, the Bank of Canada will define the design and regulations first. That process will inform partners of the requirements and allow them to bid on the network development. The selected partner would then build and manage the network with oversight from the CBDC committee. This plays to each party's strengths and will lead to an efficient rollout. FinTech involvement will unlock the most exciting and unique opportunities of a CBDC. The possibilities of incorporating new data to revolutionize payments are endless. With advanced mobile wallets, parents can restrict purchases to trusted stores so their kids are always safe with their money. Conditional payments help small businesses so they can unlock opportunities that normally need high credit ratings. Fintechs will identify and solve market needs well into the future, given this new payment platform. When totaling the project budget, the Bank of Canada will bear most of the costs, but meaningful investments will be provided by partners to enhance the payment system for consumers. This project is expected to roll out over 5 years, which means an annual investment of $20 million. This is right in line with past payment innovation investments, so the cost is quite reasonable.
The impacts of implementing a CBDC are wide-ranging. We'll examine these from an economic, social, and financial perspective. From an economic standpoint, CBDCs provide you with a powerful tool to manage monetary policy, ensure the stability of the financial system, support innovation, increase environmental sustainability, and revolutionize payment efficiencies. A CBDC also expands access to banking and financial services for all Canadians by enabling instant government relief checks and instant direct delivery of paychecks with low-fee accounts and offline access. A CBDC can remove economic and geographic barriers to those currently underserved by the banking system. We anticipate financial inclusion rates rising from 85% to 93%. Finally, a CBDC will generate benefits for all stakeholders, but it's specifically worth noting that a CBDC would generate annual savings for the Bank of Canada of $30 to $40 million. In conclusion, we recommend implementing an accessible CBDC with privacy safeguards and regulatory oversight through collaboration with government and industry. In doing so, as the Bank of Canada, you can fulfill your mandate to ensure the economic and financial well-being of Canada and meet UN Sustainable Development Goal 8 to ensure sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth for all Canadians. Thank you. We'll open it up to questions.
Thank you very much. Appreciate all the information you just shared with us. One thing I'd like to just maybe have you circle back to and give and dive in a little bit deeper, or maybe clarify for me a little bit better, is, how do you describe in maybe a little bit more detail, why the privacy and security issue is an ethical issue? Like, what is the ethics, or what is the harm that you're trying to solve for with respect to privacy and security?
Thanks for that question, Kendra. I think we're ultimately looking at this in terms of protecting the rights of Canadians and ensuring that Canadians aren't harmed. As we know, a data breach could cause significant hardship to individuals. And so that really does pose an ethical dilemma, just ensuring that parties don't know more than they should about individuals, and that rights are respected.
Thank you, Anna. Does any other of the panel of judges like to ask the next question?
Yes, hi. Thank you. I really appreciate you guys gave the very good view of the ecosystem of what's being created here. So I had a few questions. I'm just going to touch up about 3 of them. So as far as looking at the finances of it, annually, say there's a savings of about 30 to 40 million, but with the cost of about 20 million. Is that from year 1 to year 5 of your rollout, or do you see that kind of changing, or the numbers being different year per year?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. Thank you, Michael, for that. So the $20 million, it would take about 5 years to roll it out. And then once it's rolled out, we'd start seeing the savings. So it would transition over time to get to that level of savings for the government, because what we would need is the adoption to ramp up. And so we expect that to happen in about 5 years after we initially roll it out. So as consumers become aware and transition to using this new currency, that's when the savings will come in, because it'll increase the efficiency of the Bank of Canada, and they'll have to physical currency will be less in demand. And so that's where a lot of the key savings are from.
Thank you. Thank you. And my first couple of questions is based on kind of the numbers, looking at the overall reach. But then looking at kind of like that sleeping giant Bitcoin, which is basically viewed as like a great savings asset, which is competing with everybody, but kind of in the background and yet in the forefront. How do you see that being any issue for us that we have to deal with?
Thanks, Michael. I think I can start us off on that answer. Absolutely, Bitcoin is a very large presence and should be regarded carefully. However, we can see that there's volatility there with prices, and so in terms of using Bitcoin as a currency, we see that there's room for an alternative for something that is more stable. So I think from the Bank of Canada's perspective, stable coins and perhaps emerging stable coins that might come from big tech may pose an even larger challenge.
No, thank you. And last question, and I'll turn it over to the next judge, the next member of the corporation here. Looking at other countries, I see what you're planning for Canada, right? And I see, again, the ecosystem looks good as far as how to protect fellow Canadians. I'm looking at other countries, so looking south, whether it's the States or looking over in Europe at various other countries. If they're not being as responsible, or if they're doing something that could conflict with what you're proposing here, how could this system deal with that? Because again, if Canadians adopting this, maybe if they see how the United States is handling it, they may say, hey, I'm still going to stay in other cryptos, or it may not be responsibly handled as far as interacting with each other. So how would this system interact with a potential corrupt system is the question.
That's an incredibly good question. I think absolutely perception of what's going on is really, around the world is really critical to the success of this initiative being within Canada. I think there's, in particular, we can look to, models that are the model that's been rolled out in China, and we can see that certainly there may be concerns among certain segments of the population and maybe even the population more broadly. So I think being aware of how things are being implemented is absolutely critical. I think communication with stakeholders throughout the entire process is absolutely critical to managing perception and ensuring that we make it clear to Canadians exactly the benefits of this program and how it's being rolled out.
Thank you. That answers my questions. Thank you.
Barbara, do you have any questions? And then also we have Amy, who did join us a little bit late, but she also is another judge on our panel.
Hi, everybody. Well, I'm going to say what an interesting presentation. Easy to follow, and your graphics absolutely were really very, very good. It's good to know that you say that, Canada, that we're underbanked to such an extent. You said and considering the expanse of the geography and, potential internet issues with, getting to all of Canada and the great geography. So one of my questions is, there's got to be some kind of skepticism with getting into this, as we've noticed from, the states and others getting into, the new forms of currency. So how do you plan to mitigate, users' apprehension and enhance consumer buy-in?
I can maybe start this one off. Thank you, Barbara, for the question. I think, one thing that the Bank of Canada really has on its side prior to this design and implementation is the amount of trust that Canadians have in our banking system. It's a very trusted system. Overall, Canadians trust the system. But on top of that, we're really going to rely heavily on those campaigns to educate Canadians and to reach out to them directly and let them know that this isn't any different than any other, money that they've used in Canada before. We're still taking the necessary steps to make sure that, it is private, it is secure, they are protected, and that's, the Bank of Canada's #1 priority. So relying heavily on those campaigns.
Thank you.
Amy, do you have a question for the team?
I have a sort of a two-part question. Again, thank you for your presentation. I apologize for being slightly late, but I think these two questions go together. I'm wondering, would individual banks volunteer to participate in this new currency once created, or would it be mandated and required at some point? What do you envision, as far as that rollout? And along with that, it's a very enormous task to start with, and would take significant investment both by Bank of Canada, but also, again, the individual banks and even individual businesses who would all be needing to update their technology and systems, accounting systems. I guess, was that something that you either considered, or how do you foresee that rolling out? Or maybe also would we support, would we be contributing money towards those changes as well?
Thank you, Amy. Maybe I can answer the first part of that question. So in Canada, the Bank of Canada and the existing commercial banks and credit unions have a history of close collaboration. We have seen that with past payment modernization efforts, that the banks and the payment service providers and the Bank of Canada have worked collaboratively together. So we, for the CBDC, we envision the same, the Bank of Canada working closely with the banks to design CBDC that works for Canadians. So I don't think it is, we don't envision it to be forced down the banks where they don't have a choice. It would be more of a collaborative approach to the CBDC development.
Yeah, and just to build on that, what we're excited about for this opportunity is the potential competition between the fintechs and the existing banks to offer services that really enhance the payment networks. In Canada right now, a lot of businesses are still writing checks, right? And one of the reasons for that is the memo line. They like to put what invoice is related to or things like that in that memo line. If you can have a payment system that is, been developed by these fintechs that go, hey, this, we're going to send you 20 payments and these are exactly what it's for. And you have all of that clarity and that transparency, and it's recorded and you can go back and refer to that. There's huge benefits for businesses. And so really, we think that, yes, there probably will be some, costs for transitioning over to it, but we think that everyone's going to be really excited by the potential for some of these innovations to help their businesses long term.
I have one more question that I'd like to address. I mean, what do you see as the biggest obstacles or risks with this implementation?
Yeah, thanks, Kendra. I think that was touched on, with one of the questions earlier. I think the biggest risk to this plan would really be the buy-in of the major financial institutions. In Canada, we refer to the big five. They hold considerable power. However, we do, as we've discussed, we do envision that this would be a highly collaborative approach. The Bank of Canada, as you know, works very closely with the big five. There's a close relationship, and there would be stakeholder consultations all the way through the process. So this risk, while significant, we feel would be mitigated through consultation.
And what about the legislative process? Who would the opponents to that type of legislation likely be?
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a great question. Would one of my teammates like to jump in?
Sure. Yeah. No, it's interesting that you raise that, who would be in opposition, and I think that's where, again, that sort of education piece would come into it, because we know right now the political landscape is very polarized, and so you could have someone saying these outlandish things about what it's going to do. Especially with what we're seeing from the the Chinese yuan, the digital yuan, and they're saying, okay, it's government control, and it's it's all of these things that our CBDC in Canada wouldn't be. And so that would be potentially where the opposition would come from, would be from a misunderstanding. And so that's where it's really important, again, to start the dialogue now and have people understand what this is and show them the benefits of what it's actually going to do for them. And that's really, concrete examples. And like Alana mentioned, that outreach of going, okay, here's how you use this. Here's how the benefits are going to, really help make a difference to you in your life.
Thank you. Well, I think our time is up for Q&A. I think we'd like to switch hats from being the Bank of Canada to being ourselves and give you some feedback on the presentation. I'm happy to kick that off, or Michael, Amy, Barbara, if you'd like to start.
I'll jump in. First off, hey, great presentation. Speaking in different sections, so looking at the actual presentation, how you were able to seam up what we view and what we hear. Your timing, everything was excellent. So I was really impressed by that. I noticed that in between slides, it just went. The speakers were just almost like one continuous conversation. So you guys have a very tight presentation. So pat yourself in the back for that. It's well executed. So congrats on that. As far as picking a topic, you guys picked a hot one. The financial situation is changing, and so this is right on cue. So it sounds like a financial conversation, and you could have easily had it be such, but you're looking at a very deep thing as far as people's access to their money. And then that's sparked how many wars throughout history. So you picked a really hot topic. I liked how you presented it. As far as presentation, you're good. Just keep it up. Looking at everything else, nothing strikes out to me at this moment as far as a big issue. I think you guys have a very tight presentation. So if you can get other feedback, incorporate it, make it even better. Thank you.
Yeah, I would echo Michael's comments. I think you guys did a great job. Really incredibly on point. Really did a good job, I think, of following the instructions of what we were looking for at each stage. So I think you guys really knocked it out of the park on that point. I think one thing that if you for some feedback that might help you in your next presentation, spend a little bit more time helping us understand who we are and who the Bank of Canada is. We have here Bank of America, which is just a retail bank. So helping the Americans understand, I think at the very outset, what the Bank of Canada is and what our role is. Because are we the board of directors? Are we management? Like, who are we? And I think that might help engage our mindset in terms of how we ask some of the questions and making sure we're thinking about who we are throughout the conversation. But again, I think you guys really did a good job in staying on topic and hitting the relevant points that this whole competition is about.
If I can add my bit, wow, you guys were on point. Your slide transitions were smooth. It was easy to hear each and every one of you. You were clear, you were crisp. I would say for a digital presentation, you certainly checked off all those boxes. What came to me, and I certainly agree with the comments that my colleagues have made. Equity is such a big, important item right now, especially, financial equity, digital equity. And considering how large Canada is in so many islands and areas where only Lord knows how one gets there, or the kind of infrastructure there is, roadways, as well as, digital and things like that. So I would say personally, I would like to hear more about that, because as we grow as a global economy, as Canada continues to grow, having people who can participate in the system is to me very, very important. And something else that I would like to, and it'll also help with your buy-in and your sell-through, because adoption is really important. You said there's like a 5-year window. There are other items and other products that might happen between now and then. And so I would also, how did you test your concept? So that might be something, that's one of the questions that I wrote down on my sheet was, well, okay, this sounds feasible, but has the concept been tested? What's something similar to it that you could pull as a parallel? So those are my comments. I think you guys should all pat yourselves on the back.
Yeah, this is Amy. I agree with much of what my colleagues have also said regarding the presentation. One thing that I was hoping to hear
Amy, I think we might have lost you. We can't hear you. I think you went on mute.
She has had some technology challenges this afternoon. Maybe this is a
Okay.
piece of that.
Okay, well, if Amy comes back on, we'll love to hear her additional feedback. But again, I think you guys did a great job. I think you really laid it out, you know, and it was really hard for me in some ways to come up with questions that really, you know, that were able to really look at some weaknesses, because I think you guys really did a good job. But again, I think sometimes when we're presenting things, you know, it is good to maybe go into a little bit more detail on the risks and the downsides, because it was presented in such a positive way that I don't know. I mean, it's rare that anything executes easily or on schedule or perfectly. So maybe touch on some of the more on potential risks and downsides, and what happens if we do nothing, what have happened, you know, some other alternative scenarios. Just a little, maybe just an idea for a little bit of more flavor to it. But again, I think you guys just did a great job.
May I make one observation?
Please.
Okay, and Amy just posted something in the chat.
That might have just been to you directly, Jeff. We don't see anything else.
I'm sorry, her question was, what other programs would we be pulling from?
Yeah, pulling funds from. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, just because it is such an enormous amount of money. So it's obviously a big shift if we're not already doing this. I'm just kind of curious what would be suffering, or what, you know, what other programs or plans are in place that we might be pivoting from. Thank you.
I think that's a question.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, no, Amy, that's a really great question. Nick, I see that you unmuted. Did you want to tackle that?
Yeah, well, it's actually an interesting time for the retail payments landscape in Canada right now. So just in the past year, they've kind of redone the interbank financial transaction system. And so that was a system that was like over 20 years old. And that was purely for the high value transactions. And what's next is that their current, you know, low value system for transactions between people's accounts, that was first introduced in 1984. So we know that that is potentially coming, and our thought would be to, you know, instead of dedicating money to kind of revamp something that is going to go out of date already, let's put those funds towards this new system that's going to solve way more issues than simply just an update of kind of an existing architecture. And so what we've seen for those dollars that have been spent, it's about the same as what they just spent to redo that high value transfer system between the banks. And so we know that, you know, that number, while it does seem intimidating, is about what they've been spending already.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. So just three things I'd like to say as Director of the Institute for Business Ethics and Sustainability and hosting the competition. First, I want to welcome you, because it's wonderful to have you and your university participating. One compliment that I haven't heard said yet is you handled the questions so wonderfully by always affirming the question. That's a really good question. The way in which you affirmed was really masterful, I thought. I just want to speak to tomorrow, so you have that feedback related to that. The 10-minute presentation tomorrow will not use PowerPoint. It will only focus on the ethical dimension of what's being presented. And as I heard your presentation, I thought of two buckets of ethics. One is kind of the compliance and regulatory and care for, privacy and some of these kinds of things. Critical, very important, one dimension. Another dimension is your advocacy for banking access and real economic opportunity, especially for the disadvantaged. And that is an aspiration of service and access. And so you were so good in the way in which you laid it out in your PowerPoint about those dimensions. If you can take the feedback that you received from the judges and some of the things that they identified, that's the kind of thing that you will want to focus on and flesh out as you prepare your ethics presentation tomorrow. There is not a Q&A point for that. There will be feedback, but really it's the invitation to speak specifically to the ethical dimensions of your issue and your solution. The 90-second is completely different. It's like an elevator pitch, and this one focuses on sustainability, not specifically on ethics. So in that 90-second pitch, the convention is, yeah, I heard you're working on this idea for Bank of Canada. Why is that important, and what does it have to do with sustainability? And that's a separate piece. So I just wanted to kind of give you an overview for those. If you have any questions about that we can help you with as you're preparing, I want to give you the opportunity for that too.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Anybody else have any other questions or comments they'd like to share? And open it up to the participants as well if you have any questions for us.
No, but thank you all for your feedback. That's, I think you touched on a few really good points that we're excited to incorporate for tomorrow. So thank you all.